If you would, turn with me to 1 Timothy. We are continuing our ongoing study in 1 Timothy. Tonight, we are in chapter 5. We're going to be looking at verses 3 through 16, noting the care of widows within that context. Now, I'd encourage you to take opportunity to go back and to read all of this. It's quite a few verses, so tonight we will not be reading through that, but we will be addressing each of these verses as we do this study. You know, one of the things that we see in the New Testament church is a desire to take care of widows. And there was a great concern. We see in the church at Jerusalem where some widows had been neglected, and they set individuals to take care of those people. In the book of James, in the first chapter, in verse 24, it says, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world." Here in 1 Timothy chapter 5, in verse 3, it says, "Honor widows who are widows indeed." Whenever we think about those widows that are widows indeed, it denotes the individual who meets the qualifications that are enumerated within this passage. And it's also those that have no one. Back in the day when this was written, if a woman became a widow and she had no one to take care of her, family or friends or someone, she was left without. And I want you to think about this. Yes, some people were able to live to an older age, but most of the time, people did not live to the age as we live today. So whenever we think about widows indeed, we think about widows, we think about older folks. In our perception, these would have probably been people younger than ourselves. Well, some of you are just puppies, but you know, what can I say? But these would have been people probably in their 50s, maybe, if they were fortunate. And to become a widow was nothing that was out of the ordinary, because men went to war, there was illness, people just did not live as long. As we look at 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 3 through 16, the Apostle Paul gives us instruction of how to care for these dear, sweet Christian ladies. And there are even times today where dear Christian ladies who fulfill these requirements are in need today. He begins by talking about their families. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, going down to verse 3, it says, "Honor widows who are widows indeed. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, they must first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family and make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of the Lord." When we think about piety, it denotes the idea of reverence and respect. Over in Ephesians chapter 6, it talks about children honoring their parents. And as children, when our parents get older, they need help. I can attest to that because I think I'm getting older for some reason. And there are things sometimes that I need assistance with. And I have to call on the children to come and help with those types of things. So we need to be those who are making certain that we are helping those who have given us life. And I know there are some struggles within that concept, but as Christians, we need to help those who are in need. We need to give in return to our parents. Again, we go back to 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 4, where it talks about children, but not just children, also grandchildren. You know, some of our grandchildren have moved back to town. They're right close to us. And I was all excited. And I told them, look at all these things you can come help me do. Yeah. And you know what they said? Okay. Have y'all seen them lately? No, I hadn't seen them lately. I guess it's because I haven't been over and mowed their yard. Maybe that's the deal. But we do for our grandchildren, and they also do for us. I don't know. It notes here that we need to make some return to our parents. And some people say, well, you know, we owe them. Well, we do owe them. We owe them a lot. I tell you what, I'm so thankful that my parents gave me all that they did all those years, and even up until the time that they left this world for the next. And I always try diligently to help my folks. And we're blessed that we have children that help us. But a lot of people aren't blessed with that. And that's sad. But it is a reality. We need to care and be thankful for what we owe. And that's what it notes here, to make some return to our parents. Because this is acceptable in the sight of God. They took care of us. We need to take care of them. And this is a profession of true faith. Going on down to 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8. It says, but if anyone does not provide for his own household, and especially, or provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. You know, refusal to provide for one's own family is a denial of faith. And we can add James chapter 1, verse 27 in on this. Even back in the time of this writing, secularly, individuals noted that every man should take care of his own family. And it notes here, who are his own? Well, parents are part of that. Our parents, our children, our grandchildren, and sometimes great-grandchildren, they need our help. They need our encouragement. But they also need to give back. I was thinking of the word reciprocate, but they need to give back. Everybody take care of everybody else. And that's a blessing. Families should care for those that are widows indeed. If they're left alone, yes, we have a requirement to take care of their needs as Christians. But if the family is available, they need to step up. Or if other people are available, they need to step up and take care of what they need to be doing. There to be those who are blessing, not just thinking about themselves. And yes, there is a time when the church needs to assist. And again, as I noted, if the family's available, they need to take care of that loved one. Don't care who they are. Don't care the situation. They need to take care of that loved one the very best that they can. And I have seen some very unique things in families. If you are around families when a loved one is on the transition stage, you see the situation in those that comes about in that kind of a deal. Sometimes it's sad. But as Christians, as God's children, we need to take care of them. But if there is no one to help them, they need to be put on the list. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 9 it says, a widow is to be put on the list only if she is not less than 60 years old, having been the wife of one man. These are those who are cared for by the church, by Christians, fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. Now, there are other requirements that we will note here in a little bit to meet that widow indeed designation. Now, we also understand that there are times that there are special needs that widows, even widowers, have. I'm always mentioning that when there is a need, don't just look to young people, young families. See what the older members, see what they need also, because they may be in need. Many older people that are out there in the world today, sadly, because of their situation, they have to choose. Am I going to buy a little something to eat? Am I going to buy my medicine? Am I going to pay for my bills? There's a lot of people out there like that. And there are times that brothers and sisters can help with those special needs. And it's appreciated. It's a blessing. And we need to let people do that because they are blessed, as the individual receiving the blessing is blessed. And again, there could come a time when that care is extended a little longer than just for special needs. And I've seen that in congregations, that there would be a widow indeed, and they would be destitute, and the church helped them. And there's been different avenues in which that was provided. But we have to meet these qualifications. One that is noted here in verse 9 is if she is not less than 60 years old. So we note that this individual is over 60 years old. Now, again, let me reiterate. There would have been some people that was 60 years old during this time of this writing. There would not have been a lot. And people made the transition way earlier in life than they do today. Because a lot of people, I've run into folks that in their 90s, some people I've seen in their hundreds and over today. But if an individual is to the point that they really need assistance, they can't afford the things that they need, these widows, over 60 years old, we have an obligation. But it also notes, having been the wife of one man. Now, in this brings to light the idea of one husband at a time. Because some people, as we will note later in this lesson, if it's a younger person that is widowed, then they're encouraged to get married. Down in verse 14. One of the things that we think about is that they also need to be those who are working for God, being in service to God. In verse 10, It says having a reputation for good works, being one that is out there doing good things for others. This is part of the requirements that Paul is giving us here. And if she's brought up children, if she has shown hospitality to strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has assisted those in distress, and if she has devoted herself to every good work. These qualifications were required because the church can only do so much. But this is for the ones who have given their life to God and in service to Him. For the younger ones, of course, as we were mentioning just a little bit ago, they need to be refused, not put on the list. In verse 11 and 12, it says, but refuse to put younger widows on the list. For when they feel sensual desires in disregard of Christ, they want to get married, thus incurring condemnation because they have set aside their previous pledge. These younger widows are in essence still ready to have a husband. And that goes back to what we just mentioned about the older widows. Maybe that had happened to them, but she's only had one husband at a time. Now, we understand that younger widows, sometimes there is a short-term need. Folks fall on hard times. That's just a reality. And sometimes they need a little help or maybe some groceries or whatever it may be, just to get by. But also, they need to think about the situation that they're in as younger widows and get married. Now, that's hard today. Very difficult for a young person, young woman, a young widow to find someone to marry. Very difficult. But there again, that's what they're encouraged to do. And they don't fall into that category of a widow indeed. Now, the thing is that they have those sensual desires, and they need to fulfill that in the marriage situation. They will want to remarry. They want to not forsake the commitment that they would have to another. Back in the day, not too long ago, if a younger woman became a widow, she would find someone that could help take care of her and her family. And a lot of men, same deal. They needed someone to help with their family. And things have changed in our world, but it hasn't changed with God. If they don't remarry, if they don't take care of themselves, they can get themselves into trouble. Let's just put it that way. In verse 11, it says, verse 13, let's go down to 13. It says, at the same time, they also learn to be idle as they go around from house to house, and not merely idle, but also gossips and busybodies, talking about things not proper to mention. Very simply can become idle gossips. And there are several passages like 2 Thessalonians 3, verse 11, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 15, it talks about idle gossip. Now, I understand that this is talking about widows. It's talking about the widows indeed and these young widows. And it talking about them going around and instead of taking care of a family and like they need to be, they're out doing other things. And gentlemen, women aren't the only ones that gossip. I have heard men tell some of the wildest tales and the wildest things you've ever heard. Now, personally, if I don't have something to share that's good gossip, I'll make something up. You know, you all know me well enough that I'll make up some story. But the thing about it is, they need to be focused. They need to be focused on their service to God, encouraged to be those who remarry, get too busy. Younger widows, again, as we note, there in verse 14, therefore I want younger widows to get married, bear children, keep house, and give the enemy no occasion for reproach. Don't allow Satan to get involved. And that goes all the way back to those sensual desires. It goes back to all of the stuff that we just noted a moment ago of being idle, going around from house to house and gossiping, being busybodies, talking about things not proper to mention. Get married, take care of your children. And that's what Paul is telling the young preacher Timothy to instill in these younger women that fall into this situation. Don't give an opportunity for Satan to get in. And that's what we see in verse 15. For some have already turned aside and followed Satan. They've fallen prey to this situation. And this is not good. Now, I encourage you, go back, look at this passage, because it's important. Because we will run across those who are widows indeed. Those who are over 60 years old, those who have nobody. And there's a lot of thought about a person's situation and why they're in that situation that they have nobody. And I'm not going to enumerate on all of those things here tonight. Because honestly, as I have walked the path of this life and tried to help others, and like I said a while ago, I've been where people are either waiting on a loved one to make a transition, or that person has made the transition. And sometimes families are struggling. Families are struggling, especially when it comes to taking care of parents, especially widows. I think it really boils down to parents. You know, our responsibility to our parents, our mothers, that's what it is. It's a mother. Even continues after our mother is no longer a widow, but has made a transition into the next reality. And a lot of families struggle with that. I'm so thankful that that never was something that came up with my parents or Linda's parents. So if they needed something, there was plenty of folks there to take care of the need. And we always took care of that need. But think about what our parents did for us. And I know some did more, some did less. But be thankful for what you received and share that back. Yet, there are times when we are obligated. Again, going back to verse 16. If any woman who is a believer has dependent widows, she must assist them, and the church must not be burdened, so that it may assist those who are widows indeed. If they can find assistance where they need it, maybe even a congregation can help with those special things. And we have responsibility for that. And a lot of people, folks, a lot of older people, they don't ask. They don't tell you their situation. And that's why it is so imperative that we keep our eye out on one another, especially those who don't have anybody, who are truly widows indeed. Again, go back and look at this. That's a lot within that context. But if there's a need on your heart tonight that we can assist you with, please allow us to do so. Come now, as together we stand and as we sing.